action. And I was just thinking about it in my mind. Do you think that maybe that's happened as a result of the wrestlers living for the Internet fans who put up their star ratings and their Match of the Year candidates? Do you think that maybe that's had some kind of effect on the way the guys wrestle these days?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. If you go to any, and that started with WrestleMania 3, that mindset. If you go to any show, name the level of the show, but you go to it and ask anybody in the locker room, what are they there for? What's their motivation there? And they will, the vast majority of them will all stand up and say, I'm here to have the best match on the show. And I think that's wrong. You should be there to have the match that sells the most tickets. That's your job, really, is to sell tickets. And to be honest with you, the vast majority of the guys, they don't care what the attendance is. All they care about is if they had a great match. And the only way you really know that you had a great match is if fans who aren't in the business, that don't know anything about the business, don't understand what it is you're really out there trying to do, because they don't have the experience. Now, they're entitled, don't get me wrong, everybody's entitled to their criticisms. They're entitled to their opinions. They've paid their money. They are more than welcome to discuss whatever it is they want about the product. They paid to see it. I have no problem with that. But what the problem is that now the guys dictate their performance based on what the person's opinion is of it, and not what the attendance of the show is. Can I tell a quick little story?
Feel free.
To illustrate this point?
Sure.
To drive it home?
Absolutely.
Okay. A while back, I was in Syracuse, New York, like a year and a half, 2 years ago. I don't know. I have no sense of time. To see it to work on a show. And I was working on the show, and that afternoon show up, and a lot of the guys were all talking about a guy named Jesse and how they were so concerned because Jesse would be in attendance tonight, and that they needed to make sure they had the best match on the show because Jesse would write a report on the Internet about their match. And, this Jesse was, apparently, if he wrote a positive or a negative report, it really meant something to them, And I thought, well, who's this Jesse? Is this like Dave Meltzer or, Wade Keller or something like that? This guy seems to carry a lot of weight, which is kind of absurd anyways, that just a fan is carrying that much influence, but apparently this Jesse does. So, the day goes on, and before the show, I go out to, sell my pictures and T-shirts and generally whore myself out. What do you do? And I'm sitting there at the table, and a young kid approaches and starts talking to me. And, I ask him his name. I ask how old he is, and he's like, he's 13 years old. But this kid's like probably the most intelligent, mature, knowledgeable 13-year-old I've ever met. I mean, he's sophisticated, It's like talking to a 35-year-old man. He's not 13. That's why I asked him his age. I said, man, how old are you? I said, he said, oh, I'm 13. I said, you're kidding. And, just the way he was talking and acting, if you didn't see him physically standing in front of you, you'd have sworn you were talking to an adult. And guess what he knew everything about? He knew everything about wrestling. And unfortunately, guess what else he knew everything about?
What's that?
My career.
My
career. Yeah. So he begins to talk to me as if he is a 20-some-plus year vet and asking me questions. And, I talk to him as if he's a 13-year-old child. Not being disrespectful, but certainly not talking to him as if he's Robert Gibson or Bob Eaton or, Andre the Giant or somebody like that, who's performed and done this for a living for quite a long time. I talk to him like he's a 13-year-old child. I mean, come on, the kid, his testicles haven't even dropped. He hasn't even went through puberty yet. The last time he was in a woman was either in the birth canal or when he visited the Statue of Liberty. So my son is 20 years old. My daughter's 21. I don't listen to them. So why am I going to listen, have a conversation where I listen to this kid discussing what I do for a living? as if he's done it too. And so he gets frustrated with me, and I say, oh, by the way, what's your name? And guess what his name was, guys?
Jesse.
Yes, it was.
Oh, my God.
Jesse. So now there are a group of professionals who are supposed professionals who are allowing a 13-year-old child to dictate what they will do to attempt to make a living, to feed their families.
Wow.
A child who is lucky enough, if he mows the lawn, will get a weekly allowance, has no responsibilities, has no concept of what it would take to pay rent and to feed his children and put clothes on their back. Doesn't know, doesn't care. But every one of those people that were performing there that night were concerned about a 13-year-old kid's opinion of what their match would be.
Wow. Now, what was the review of your match? If you don't, do you remember?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you, but it was not a good match. So that's inconsequential. But it was horrible. But it does. The point is that the wrestlers themselves show up hoping to have the best match on the show, and not caring whether or not they had the match that sold, that they were the attraction, that they were the reason that the most tickets were sold. And it's become a mindset throughout the business.
Now, you mentioned WrestleMania 3 at the start of this, and I wanted to go back to that and maybe close out with this question. Is what about WrestleMania 3 made you think that way? Are we talking about the difference between Hogan, Andre, and Steamboat Savage, or what are we referring to? Okay.
Yeah, because if you ask anybody what was the best match on WrestleMania 3, everybody will say unequivocally that it was Savage and Steamboat. And that was kind of where it kind of started. And technically, and I'm not taking anything away from what they did, I'm sure, but, to be honest with you, and what the match that was the best match was the match that sold the most tickets. And the match that sold the most tickets was Hogan and Andre. 93,000 people paid to see Hogan and Andre. And if you listen to old wrestlers, Pat O'Connor, Lou Thesz, Walter Kowalski, any of those guys, when they talk about, like, when they sold out Kaminsky Park or any of those, big shows, right?
Right.
You never, ever hear them discuss the quality of the match. They'll just say it was a great match. We had this many people there.
Yeah. Every
one of those guys, that's all they concerned themselves with, were how many people were in the building. And the reason they did was because that allowed them to, if there were fewer people there, that meant their payoff was less. And if their payoff was less, then the way they fed their families was not as, they weren't as capable of feeding their families. Not to mention, if they were not a contributory factor or were not the factor in why people showed up in that building, the likelihood of them getting booked on the next show went down. So their opportunity to make a living went away. Do you guys understand?
Oh, I agree.
And so the focus of trying to have the best match on the show, which has become really the driving focus of any wrestler, and not being the match that sells the most tickets, is what's doing a lot of harm to the business.
Ironically, we discussed that a little bit with Nova, where he was talking about how many Match of the Year candidates he reads about on the Internet that took place in front of 150 people. He said, it's amazing.
You could have the greatest match in the history of wrestling. The greatest match in the history of wrestling. And let's say that 500 people showed up. Let's say that 2,000 people showed up. You run the same building next month, and only 80 people show up. Was it the greatest match in the history of wrestling, or was it not? If it didn't,
but we're talking about two different categories, though. At this point, we're talking about creatively and technically an impressive match, and we're talking about drawing-wise a great match. And I'm actually one of the few people who enjoys Hogan and Andre over Savage and Steamboat. Basically, the way I measure how a match is great is how emotionally invested I, as a viewer, watch it, like a film, like a play, like anything along those lines.
And that's a wrestler's job. It is not to have a technically great match. It's to get you emotionally vested to the point where you'll pay to see them again. That's what a wrestler's job is. Wrestlers all believe that it's not about getting you emotionally invested in them and paying to see them again. They now believe that it's all about having the best technically sound match.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same with a this is my approach towards all art, and I fully believe, especially as an actor, that wrestling is an art form, no matter what anyone says. And the fact is, same with the film, same with the play. I mean, you can have all your technical camera angles, all you want. The fact is, if you are not emotionally invested in the characters, in the story, anything, then it doesn't matter. Nothing matters because because that's what art is. Art is emotional. It's not technical. It's not logistical. And I mean, at first I thought you were just talking about drawing money, like maybe if the main event sold tickets, but it's terrible. But I mean, I see we're on the same page now as far as emotional investment in the match, and yes, I definitely do agree with that.